need to mute my mic like Michelle does.
You're good. Welcome to the Writing Gals, where we are 4 sweet romance authors, 3 tonight, staying up late talking everything historical romance, which I know very little about. So I'm very excited to sit back and be educated by our resident historical romance fabulous people. Hold on, sorry. Okay. So today we're going to start by talking about what we're doing. So Judy, why don't you go ahead and take us off?
Okay. I've been working on my book a little bit called Kissing the Boy Next Door. I have gotten like almost 3 chapters written. But I've been working on other stuff this week too. I just got the release date for my audiobooks. The first one will come out on Christmas, which I'm super excited about. And then also I've been working on something kind of interesting that I don't know how it's going to go, but I am been working with my agent to do a contract for a digital game for my first book, Protect My Heart. And so it's going to be on like a phone app where people play games, I guess. So I'm not quite sure how it all works, but I'm excited to learn more. And yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Super, super exciting. All right, Jen, why don't you tell us what you're up to?
Oh, okay. First of all, so happy to be here. I feel like famous. This is fun. You guys are the best. So I'm working on a lot of stuff. So I guess I'll stick with my historical. I can tell you my contemporary plans a little bit later, I guess, during, as it goes along. But my historical things, I have 2 anthologies out right now that I'm just trying to market and sell a little bit. One's with my publisher who I love, Christmas Courting, and the other one's with Timeless. I guess they're a publisher too. So I'm trying to keep those visible right now, which is a little tricky since there's so much Christmas going on. But I'm editing like crazy. I have 2 big projects I'm editing. One of them is something I'm really excited about. It's a time travel, but what it is basically is a Regency and a contemporary in one. So we've got a really handsome Darcy kind of guy who comes forward in time. Think like Kate and Leopold on steroids. It's going to be really fun. So I've been editing that for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'm working on my own personal series. I want to start a Regency series that's just mine, and maybe 1 a month, I think I'm going to try to do. And it's a really, really fun family of sisters in a cottage by a castle who find love one by one. So that's my kind of, I'm mapping that out right now.
That sounds super fun. And I love Kate Leopold. And not just because Hugh Jackman plays in that, and I am 100% a Hugh Jackman fan, but because I love that story. And I also like the girl. What's a girl character name? What's her name, actress? She's in
Meg Ryan.
Meg Ryan. We all had a brain freeze. It's really, famous
yes.
Meg Ryan.
Well, I'm excited. Very excited. Sounds amazing. And, the 5 sisters that sounds exciting too.
Thanks.
All right, Michelle, tell us what you're up to.
So right now I am enjoying doing nothing at all, unless I just want to. It's been awesome for like 3 days. I recently published Sugar Plums and Mistletoe. It's live. I was only like 24 hours late clicking publish. And I'm pretty proud of that, considering how crazy things got for a little while. It's doing really good. It's rising up. It's starting to get some reviews. And A Tree for a Billionaire is still doing great. It's doing wonderful. It's still, topping the new release charts in Clean and Wholesome. And so I'm hoping the 2 together will help me have a really great month here, possibly a record month for me. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, everything seems to be going that direction. And I am actually about to tear into my Regency work in progress. That is like, Jen knows it very well. She's read every chapter that I've got written so far. And I'm at between 25 and 30,000 words on it. So I'm going to spend the rest of my Christmas break tearing it apart, outlining it, figuring out how to make this thing happen. Because the thing about Regencies is that you get a whole lot of people doing a lot of things, and you have all these subplots that just kind of build themselves, right, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah, and you have to tie them all up and get them all done, and it's at a house party, which we've talked about on here before, so there's a lot of people. It's just a lot more work than my contemporary stuff, and so I'm just going to take my time and make sure that the story goes right. So that's what I'm doing for the next 3 weeks, is trying to finish that one and get it off to edits, which is a whole different thing with Regency than contemporary. So that's me, Amy.
That's
What do
super
you got?
exciting. And it's funny because during her last days of writing, Michelle was like, I'm never going to write again, and I'm going to take the longest break. And then like a day later, she's like, I think I'm going to move just to my Regency. So it just proves that, we may say that we're done writing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And for me, I just published my Christmas break mistake, which is my YA book for the countdown to Christmas. It goes free tomorrow. So if you're looking for a good book to read, hopefully a good book, pick it up tomorrow because it'll be free. And then I have 10,000 words into my next YA book, which is going to be the collaborative series that we're doing with a bunch of other authors, where we're each releasing a book every 3 weeks. And it's basically going to span the school year. So they're all connected by the school year. They're all connected by knowing each other in school and town and stuff. So that's really exciting. And then I also just finished the first chapter of my next adult series I'm doing, which is going to be about brothers. So I'm really kind of going headfirst into all of this connected series, which I've never done before. But I'm hoping that will help with my read through and kind of planting seeds for future books in them with different people. So for my YA book, I'm going to do a spin-off series of my male main character's twin sister. And so it's called Misunderstanding the Billionaire's Heir. And they come from trust fund babies. And so she goes to a prep school. So it's going to be about her story in the prep school. So it's really fun to have her in this book because I can kind of start setting the tone for her book that I'll start off the series with. So that's really fun, but I know I have to plot really well. So I got all my covers done for my brother's series, and I went through and I named all the love interests and what do they do and where do they fit in, so that now as I'm writing the first book, I can start weaving them into the story. So I'm pretty excited about that, and just trying to figure out how to keep my books high in rank and make money this Christmas season. So, all right, let's get started. I'm going to read Jen's bio. An award-winning author, including the gold in Forward Indies Book of the Year awards, Jen Geigle.
Yeah, you did it. Geigle.
Geigle Johnson discovered her passion for England while kayaking in the Thames near London as a young teenager. Oh, you have such an exciting life. I never went anywhere fun when I was a teenager. She once greeted an ancient turtle under the water by grabbing her fin. She knows all about the sound a water ski makes on glassy water and how to fall down steep Mongols with grace. During the study break date in college, she sat on top of a Jeep's roll bars up in the mountains and fell in love. Hopefully the Jeep was not driving while you were on it.
Nope, parked under the stars,
Okay. Now she loves to share bits of history that might otherwise be forgotten. Whether in Regency England, the French Revolution, or colonial America, her romance novels are much like life is supposed to be, full of adventure. So very, very exciting. Sorry that my phone just dinging. So let's start talking about historical fiction versus romance. So why don't you take it away?
Okay, and Michelle, feel free to chime in whenever, because she's my fellow Regency House Party girl. There is a big difference. So all of you who write romance understand what a romance is, a genre category romance where it drives your story. And historical romance is no different. And I get caught in this trap a little bit, where your history and your plot and the events of the day can start taking over the power of what should be driving your story. So if you're trying to write a romance and place it somewhere in the past, and then you have a historical romance. It would be historical fiction if your plot and the events of the day were driving your plot, and there was a love story involved, but it wasn't the main force of your story. So yeah, maybe many of you already knew that. Maybe it sounds self-explanatory, but there is a big difference. And it's tricky to write a historical romance because there is so much going on. that you lose sight of the fact that there are supposed to be two people falling in love. And there's all these other exciting things going on, and you have to remind yourself to weave them in carefully. And one thing I do that really helps me is I try to plot my story carefully, even though I'm kind of a pantser. But as the historical events of the day, or my main plot of my story that's not the romance arc, as that's going on, I try to tie in the equivalent of intensity in my romance story. So like when the climax comes in the plot, if there's a big, awful dark moment going on in the world around them, that's the moment when my two characters are also having their big dark moment. And so I just tie it in, and it helps me kind of weave everything together. And then it brings it all more powerfully to the reader too, I think. Anyway, that's my quick spiel. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that? Did I cover it? Okay.
So when you start a historical romance, how do you go, okay, I wanted to tell the story about, because to me, I think historical would be difficult, but also a little easy, because you're like what you said, where you tie your love, your dark moment in with what's going on around. So you kind of already know what's going to happen to lead up to the dark moment in like the environment. So do you pick that one, and then that's how like, I want to write about the French Revolution, and so my story, you get what I'm asking?
I do. Yes and no, because it's kind of like almost the same as contemporary, where there's a lot of events going on today in our world. And so if you were going to write a romance about today and you wanted to tie it into some event, then you could do the same as you would for a historical. But what I think is really cool about writing historical is you can get a lot of cool ideas just from history. Like when you always say, I couldn't make this stuff up. It's history itself. What actually happened is often way cooler than anything we could ever invent. It's just really neat. So I have never written a romance where start to finish I was mimicking an event or something that happened in that day. It's more like I'm making up fictional characters that are living in a real situation that was there. You know what I mean? And so it's a little different. So it's and that's totally separate from what a regency is. And I'm assuming we'll eventually talk about what a regency is, because it's a genre all by itself and has its own feel, kind of separate from your typical historical romance, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
So okay. Historical would be like not Western, because that's its own category, but not regency. So basically everything else.
I think historical is anything that happened in the past. So you can have a contemporary Western, or you can have a historical Western. You can have a Civil War historical. You can have a medieval historical, or you know.
So it's like historical, and then it's a bunch of genres or subcategories underneath of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Regency is a huge one. I think it's our hottest selling one. Victorian's really close. A lot of people confuse and combine Regency and Victorian. And World War II has always been really big and still is. And it's those markets that people think, oh, they're so flooded, but people keep buying them. So they're not flooded. They're just, you have hungry readers, right? And all of those are historical. And then what's interesting, Regency has just done something totally unique within all of those genres. Regency has become its own sort of voice, because you can have like a romance written in any time period, and I can even write a romance written in the Regency era, but I wouldn't call it a Regency romance unless it had certain things. Like it's like Georgette Heyer. Michelle is the expert, the reigning pro of Georgette. We call her Heyer in our group. She kind of started the idea of there's a tiny, tiny, tiny section of the Regency era that involved the aristocracy. There's just so few of them, but we're all fascinated with them. And it's the bone tons, like this little top, percentage of the nobility and the really wealthy. And Georgette started writing historicals about that time period where, everybody has a lot of money and they're all going through a season in London and they're falling in love, and it's perfect for romance. But it has a feel. And so to write a Regency is slightly different than writing just a historical romance, because it has expectations. There's subtlety. There's the wealth. There's the class. It's about And some of the typical figures of the time come into play. There's a man named Beau Brummel, and he comes up in a lot of different regencies. He's a guy who was fascinated with his cravat and with fashion, and he was like, and he was a real guy. And then there's the prince. They call it regency because of the prince regent, and he was like a real character and kind of a big partier. And he comes up in a lot of books. And there's real figures that people bring in, and they play a part in these regency romances. And there's lots of rules you have to follow and those kinds of things.
So what's interesting about the Regency romance genre or category, whatever you want to call it, is that Jane Austen, who everybody is so familiar with her books, did not actually write Regency romance, right? Because she was a contemporary of the time. She lived. Her first book was published in 1811, I think, even though she'd written a few years before that. It's published in 1811. And so she was writing then. So for her, it was contemporary. She was writing contemporary romance. And she did it.
Billionaire romance.
Yeah. So, yeah, she did. She wrote like the first billionaire romance ever. Because if you take Darcy's fortune and take it into what today is, he would be a billionaire. So anyways, that's what's really cool. So she was writing contemporary romance, but it lasted so long that now people think of it as a historical, but technically it's not a historical. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing to say. Like, I believe personally that if you want to write a good Regency romance, you need to read the works of the people who forged the genre. You can use Jane as a reference because she really lived back then. So she's great for what people actually said and what they actually wore and, all these certain things. But if you want to write the genre really well, then you need to read the people who literally created it. And like Jen says, it is specific. And that's where a lot of stuff comes in, where you have people who feel like everything has to be exactly historically accurate and this one in, and then you have these people who don't care a flip about any of the historical accuracy, and we have a name for those people. We call them prom dress regencies. Jen coined the phrase. There are going to be people out there who are going to be like, Jen's probably going to hate me now. But it's just like dressing it up pretty and making it this like make-believe fantasy world, because that's what everybody likes, right? They like the dresses and the carriages and the titles and the mansions and all these really fancy things. So you have kind of like these two things, and they're both viable in the market. That's what's interesting, is they both have a market, they both have an audience, and there's kind of this little war within the category among the people that are writing it and the readers. So it's just fun. You have to figure out where you're going to be on that spectrum.
If I tried to write historicals, Regencies, I'd probably be in the prom dress section of that.
Me too.
Yeah, it's like they're all pretty and it's fun and they have castles.
And there's this rich guy.
That's all you need. And then you got a Regency right there.
With ball,
Yeah, you guys are like, nails on the chalkboard. Stop talking.
That's why we write contemporary.
Right. So how does this all apply to writing a market? And Michelle kind of touched on it a little bit, but I don't know if you want to add any more to it, Jen, about that part. Oh, we can't hear you. Are you muted? Oh, now you're muted. Oh, Michelle, you're muted too.
Maybe unplug the earbuds.
Yeah, as we found out with my stuff,
Can I just use my computer mic?
Yeah, you're good.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just use my computer mic. Okay. So I have thoughts about market, and I have I'm trying to understand how you hook your readers, right? So basically you've got to package your book well so it sells and put it in the right categories. You guys are really good at showing your readers how to do that. And I think that's really important. So you study the market and you try to figure out where to place your book and, titles and covers and all that. But once you have this book, I feel like you have to be really careful how you hook these readers. So you guys were talking about prom dresses and what readers love in a Regency. And there's a couple things I've learned about historical readers. So when you're talking about to market, these are the things I think need to be that the readers want to feel and experience in your book. And it's interesting to me.
I write contemporary and I write historical. And what I've noticed with my readers is my historical readers want to feel smarter at the end of my book. It's not necessarily just an escape. They value things in a historical. The reason they're reading a historical is because at the end of the book, they want to know and feel and live something they didn't know before. And they almost want to be able to quote you and be like, yeah, I know about Regency because I read this in Jen's book or whatever. And so they want that really bad. And so they want that, but they also want to feel totally immersed in your world. And they want to love your world. And the Regency's fun because it's a fantasy that you have a maid that brings you food before you get out of bed, that starts the fire in your grate, that dresses you in the prettiest way possible. You have all the money in the world and you have men fawning over you. And the whole purpose of your life is to date handsome men. So that's really fantastical and cool. And so those are the things that, like you were talking about as far as prom dress reality, like that's a hook for your reader. So you need to make sure you balance that every page, that every chapter, that every few pages, you have hit upon things that are making your readers read more. And so those are a couple, and then they want to be able to, they don't want to be bored. So like you might be fascinated with this really cool, you can research too much. You might be really fascinated with the way that the wood grain, fits on a floor in a parlor because you learned this really cool thing, but I'm telling you, not a single reader cares. And so if you want to include the wood grain in the parlor, you have to say, while her hand was pressed on his forearm, she glanced down and, oh, there's that beautiful wood grain, but he's talking about something really cool at the same time. You know what I mean? You slip it in. They don't want to be bored. So your research is important, but you can't inundate them. And then the other thing, what's the other thing I was thinking about? Yeah, those are what I've noticed. That's it about Regency. Now there's, I'm sure, a lot more things, but as opposed to some of my contemporary readers, and they, of course, everyone wants to feel smarter, right? But they just want an escape, and they want really fun, and they want to feel like they want to feel things. It's just different. But one thing I've noticed, and that is they want to feel, with the historicals for sure, they care a lot that I'm accurate. They want to be able to trust that they could quote me and it'll be right. And so that's a little bit of pressure. But I wanted to make sure too that when we talked today that you guys had some confidence in your ability to start something new. Because I feel like a lot of times historical writers take a lot of pride in their knowledge and in their research. And I get that because it takes hours. I have bookshelves full of books. Every time I write a historical, I've got at least 2 full rows of books that I have read or thought about or whatever that contributed to that book. But that doesn't mean that you can't start today and write a Regency, right? Anyway, you want to say something? I'm talking too much.
Okay. You're just reading my mind. Okay, so so I am a fan of Regency to the point where I think I would say that I would rather read a Regency than a contemporary. And it was my first love and always will be. But I was so intimidated by writing it that I waited until I'd written books for like 8 years before I began to have the courage to say, okay, I have grown enough as a writer that I'm willing to take this step. But at the same time, I also regret that I did that because you're right. You can start, whenever, at any point and start. And the only way to start learning it is to start doing it. But I would recommend for anybody who isn't well read in Regency before they start writing in it, that you need to do your homework and you need to read it. Like you can't get that feel for the genre by watching movies and I would even say don't just read contemporary written Regencies. Like books that are written in the Regency genre in the last 10 years or 15 years have a different feel and voice than those that Georgette Heyer wrote back in like the 1950s. And so you need to really figure out both parts of it because I think both voices are necessary, if that makes sense. So you need to know your genre. You need to know what's out there, what people have done before you very, very well. But you also need to understand that Regency or any historical research doesn't have to completely intimidate you. I may be kind of an outsider among historical writers, but I feel like the story matters more than the history. And Jen knows I love all the historical research stuff. Like, I'm just all about it, and I love it, and I know quite a few things. But the thing is that the story comes first, because the readers care about the story. So start with your story, start with your characters, start with your plot. What do you want them to happen? Like, and all this sort of stuff is what is going to matter to your reader first. And your research just needs to be like what pertains to your story. So if you don't want to go down the rabbit hole and just sink yourself into 2 years of research for a book, then just write your story on like an outline level so you know what you need to know, right? If you know where your settings are going to be, you can go and research your settings. If you know what kind of balls you're going to go to, you can research those balls. If you know what kind of costumes you need to come up or clothes you need to come up with your characters, then you can go in and research. You can find actual historical dresses and jackets and all the stuff, and find actual pictures and just describe them in your book. Like, there's all kinds of things that you can do just based on what you've written for that story. Like, I don't have to know every single piece of clothing that people might possibly have ever worn in the Regency era. I just need to know, okay, my book's set in 1814. I'm going to go find some fashion plates from 1814, and I'm going to pick one that I like, and I'm going to describe it here. You know what I'm saying? Just pick the things you need for the story you've written, and that's an easy way to not let research keep you from writing the story. Does that sound good to everybody? Did I explain that well?
It was great. I think you're so right. And I think to add to that, there is, that's exactly empowering and what I kind of hoped people would understand. Also, there is a sense of being able to think in that time period. And that's like what you said is reading. There's secondary sources, there's first sources, and then there's like all the literature. I would read 20 minimum. I've read hundreds, so I would read at least 20 Regency romances before I even started trying to write one, because you'll learn so much just by how the characters interact and everything, like, the things that they say, customs that they have. You'll understand the rules. Back in the day, there were a lot of things that, men and women thought and did that we just don't think or do anymore. And so if you just starting with reading a bunch of those will help you a ton. And there was a question about dialogue. And I think this is where movies might help a little bit. Read it, but also not all movies. Like, I'm talking Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility, or just some of those might help you understand dialogue. What they do for me, once you've been in the era for a long time, your brain kind of switches like it's another language. And so you just sort of can speak, like, for you guys that write YA, you got your YA speak or whatever. It's like you immerse yourself into a character in a world, and then you just are able to access that part of your brain. And what that does, like Pride and Prejudice, or even the music soundtrack from that, or reviewing the way that they talked back then, just helps my brain kind of kick into gear. So it's a lot of immersion of your own self. And then some of it comes out in editing. I'll say things all the time that are modern, and I'll have, Michelle or other beta readers or anybody will pick it out and be like, so modern. And I'll see it after. If you guys know a really good editor who knows Regency, I would grab them for your copy edit, because they will be able to pick out things. There's little modern phrases. For example, my very first book I ever wrote, I had characters rolling their eyes, and I learned that's not what they just didn't. When they rolled their eyes back in Regency Day, it was more of a sexual thing. Sorry. Can you say that word on your podcast? And it had nothing to do with the teenage sarcastic fed up eye roll thing. They just didn't do it back then. So there's a lot of things like that to us are typical every day. There's also things like we would never use an eye roll in a Regency to indicate anything sexual, because our readers, whether it's accurate or not, we don't use it, because you also have to understand reader expectation and their limited knowledge. Not everybody's a Regency expert who reads your book. And so you have to be careful, that you don't include things that are outside of normal knowledge, even if it is accurate, unless you explain it. So there's rules. I wanted to quickly address the rules of Regency. There's a lot of them. You just really need to read a lot of Regencies. If you break a rule, which I do all the time, I always break rules. It's part of my plot. I feel like I think, how can I break a rule and write a story about it?
Preach it, Jen. Preach it.
If you break a rule, you have to explain it. Within the book, you have to say almost like, okay, so like I had a scene that I just wrote a couple days ago where a girl is interacting with a servant and they just kind of ignored their servants. They were really rude a lot of times. And you can't generalize everyone was rude, but people reading a Regency will think the wealthy never talk to their servants, you know, if you have somebody talking to a servant. So when you have somebody be really nice to like the butler, she puts her hand on his arm and she says, oh, thank you. I had to say within the context, even though that brazen act of whatever, you know, I addressed it and she chose to do this because she was feeling this way. I mean, I don't know. I hope I'm making sense, but if you break a rule, you have to explain it. You have to own it, and you have to show why that they are doing it anyway. Like, for example, if someone was to write about our day, and they would say something like, "Oh yeah, back then they had 55-mile-an-hour speed limits, so nobody drove over 55 ever." That could be like a Regency rule, right? But how many of us have broken the speed limit ever, right? So if you talk about breaking the speed limit in our day, you mention the fact that, oh, I'm about 5 over, I hope a cop doesn't see me, kind of thing. Anyway, that's my take.
Gotcha. Wow. That's a lot. This is why I stay in contemporary, because I would break all the rules all the time and not even know it. So, okay. So research tips would basically be read in your genre, and probably like, how would you pick, like, so let's say I'm going to write a historical Regency romance, right? So I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to look at Regency romances and I'm going to look at the top X amount. How do I know? Because I know you guys said there's a market for the prom dress Regencies and there's a market for the accurate historical. Like, if I was like, no, I want to write historical, how would I know the difference between the two, being someone who doesn't read a lot of historical?
I think one of the only ways you're ever going to know is to crack that cover up and have some knowledge of the period you're writing in. I mean, the ones we're talking about, you can open and read a chapter or two and know immediately that they haven't done any research because they've got a queen on the throne during the Regency, which...
Sorry, we're laughing. Nobody else gets it.
I mean, yeah, you have to know the time period that you're writing in at a basic level, right? If you're writing in 1776, even if it's not in America, you need to know, hey, wait, there's a war going on across the ocean, you know? Or if you're writing at a time in England when the French Revolution is going on, guess what? England was highly involved in the French Revolution because not only was the English government trying to support the French government, like, they didn't want to see a king across the channel get beheaded because that could spell huge problems for them and their king, right? But they had spies going over there. They had all their imports and exports interrupted. They had, they had people fleeing from the terror, trying to find safety and asylum in England. And people had families on both sides in England and in France. You just have to be aware, like, this is the year I'm in. What is going on in the world, and not just like in this little village, because it did drastically affect. England is a small country, and it kind of in the center or the vortex of all of these political things, because their fingers were all over the globe. And so that's the thing about historicals. You have to be able to be aware of everything that's going on around you. And so if you don't have a basic level of history or historical knowledge, then you need to stop and just learn, right? Would you agree, Jen? I mean, I was a history major in college for a reason. I knew I wanted to write historical fiction. And so I was a history major. that I knew that was going to help me as much or more than any English class I would take.
And it's really simple to just you can do base level research to get you started, to find a timeline. Even Wiki, that we don't totally trust, has a basic timeline of the world events, right? So you look up your year, and there's a lot of things going on just to get you started. Google, we're so lucky. We're so lucky that we have Google and the internet and everything. I will answer your question, Aim, and give you guys some starting points for research. As far as authors go, we can send you in a good direction. I don't know how much you guys want us to suggest people, but I can. If you look, my publisher Covenant has many authors. The Proper Love Story with Shadow Mountain has some. Most of them I highly recommend. Easily, they are accurate and they're careful. I also know Sally Britton. She's really been an awesome indie and has taken off this past year. Her books are highly respected as well. And if you start with those authors, a lot of their also bots are similar. If you look at their covers, they have a different feel because they're more historically accurate even on the cover. And just as to, it's a little bit tricky to find really good Regency covers. I just want to, explain that. It's really not as easy to have a beautiful cover with an accurate dress and accurate clothing. That's just tricky. But I'm about to write a fairy tale series with a group of authors that write Regency that are fantastic. And those guys, anyway, I'll look at the also bots for a lot of these authors, and those are good places to start. Georgette Heyer would be a great place to start. There's people reprinting all her stuff all over Amazon right now. So you can
and you can read all of her books, almost all of her books in Kindle Unlimited too.
Yeah, I've seen them.
You can just rip through it without spending a dime if you're there. Also, look, if you want some of the people who are some of the my favorite people that wrote longer ago. I don't exactly know, but Joan Smith is one of my favorites too. I've read a lot of her books, and she's just one of my favorites besides Georgette Heyer, and MC Beaton is a good one too. So then you can get kind of like I was talking about, the two different Regency voices, what people are doing now and what people did back in the early days of the genre. I think you can grow from reading all of them.
I agree. They're especially more aware of rules and stuff earlier on, and I think it's really important to understand them if you're going to choose to break them. You know what I mean? Like I was saying, I don't want to neglect Rebecca Connolly too. She's really good. So also to get you started on actual understanding how they speak is a big deal, and it's intimidating to some people. And there are places where you can go that just tell you when the first use of a word began. So you think, hey, did they say this in Regency England? And what would be a Regency equivalent? They have resources for that. You get stuck and you can look. Google Ngram is a starting place where Google just maps, according to their knowledge, the earliest use of a written word. And so you can look up the word okay was not used in Regency time period. And so you can look it up in Ngram. Oh, they started saying okay in 1940 or whatever it was. So that's a place you can go. There's a historical thesaurus that's online. You can buy it for $400 or you can look at it online for free. And it is fantastic. It'll tell you words when the word you're looking for started to be used, but it can give you other options that were used earlier. So it's a really great resource. If you look up Oxford dictionaries, it does the same thing for you. There is the whole issue of titles is a little bit intimidating. You can start writing a Regency without getting into all the nitty gritty of the hard stuff. You can write a Regency, but anyway, you can look up in Debrett's, they have modern day English rules and titles, which applies most of the time, but not all the time. So that gets you started. There's a really good blog I love, regencyresearcher.com. Nancy keeps it up, and she's on the Beaumont chapter of RWA, and that woman is always present and always answers questions, and you can ask her anything like, I was looking for a particular date of the minutes of Parliament as I was writing my third book that Covenant's going to put out in a year or so. It takes that long. But I was looking up a particular moment of the minutes in Parliament, and I asked Nancy, how do I find this? And she knew. She found it for me. So It's called regencyresearcher.com. She's fantastic. Google Maps is awesome, but you can find old maps and actually walk the streets of like Jane Austen, London. You can look up blueprints of houses. Carlton House, which is where the Prince Regent lived for a while. He's in that whole description of his house and everything is in one of my books. I just pulled up a blueprint and walked them through the actual floor plan of the house. There's so many things that are free and available on Google, and you can buy resources as you learn to know them. But like, it's easier than you think. And if you just start, it gets you there. Like I was looking up just a blog post really quick. I found one, top 10 things that make a regency. Cravats. Men are really big with the way they tie their cravats. Uses of titles, the gowns. There's always a ball. Mayfair, which is like the West End of London where all the rich people live. And there's all these things. There's like Hyde Park where everybody walks. There's batons and brooches, how they drive. They riding carriages. The Ton, getting a special wedding license. I mean, all these things, you could pick 3 of these and write a book about them. And that's all you'd have to know. Place them in London, write a book about 3 of these things that tie in with your romance. And it could get you started, but then get a good editor and somebody who knows even more than you do to help cover your bases with modern language and stuff. The more you know, the better.
So Mindy Strunk and I were actually working on a list of Regency romance tropes. And we dropped the ball and haven't finished it. But there are a lot of very specific tropes for Regency. And it's just kind of like Jen is talking about, you know, even storyline wise, there are a lot of them tie into Victorine's contemporary trope list, but they have a different spin in Regency, if that makes sense. So it might be like the fake marriage thing would have a different spin in Regency. And because in Regency, you didn't need to get married for any reason. It was just called a marriage of convenience. And so it's a little bit different, you know, but it's basically along similar lines. What you're trying to do is throw 2 people into a marriage who don't love each other and then make them fall in love. So
they probably do it every day, but you can address it like that. Yeah. It's cool. Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. Mindy's an awesome author. Our whole Regency house party. I mean, I hate to say we're great, but you can trust them. We have edited.
You can say you're great. That's totally fine.
We have edited and seen pretty much everything they've written, and they're very good, very careful. If you look at Heidi Kimball and Mindy and Sarah Cardin and Michelle and I are careful. So those guys are, you know, you can look at theirs and the Also Bots. Pretty much, they're all. Last I checked, they're all pretty good as far as trustworthy sources. But yeah, the tropes are, I asked Victorine once for a list of tropes, and a lot of them apply in one way or the other. Fairy tales are fun, taking a known story with a spin and a twist without the fantasy element. It helps you come up with your storyline that then fits in. This spring's going to be a huge fairy tale land. There's 2 groups I know of doing fairy tales, so fairy tale regencies. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. So yeah, now this is the moment. If you've got one in your back burner, put it out this spring. You'll join a whole group of us. Trying to think what else, but it's the best part about it is just to start. And I keep thinking about this dialogue. Don't let that intimidate you. Start your dialogue like you would say it, and then you can go back and try to figure out how to make it sound like the historical version. Like just like you're writing any other thing, don't let the writing block stop you. Just push through it and then go back and trust the editor in you, and you can fix it.
So I have a question.
Go ahead. I was like, I always read out loud while I'm writing in an English accent.
Oh, it's good. I love it. That's a great
You should do
idea.
that in all your books, not just Regency. Just read them all in an accent, and it'll be fun.
Oh yeah.
So my
They'll
question.
sound better. Yeah, they will. Get a guy to read them in an accent, and then you're set. Like, get the man.
That sounds like the perfect thing. I will just have Chris Hemsworth read to me my books, and that will be when I know I've made it. So how do you keep the sexual tension in your book, especially when it comes to a romance, right? In a Regency, because like back then they like didn't touch, they weren't allowed to touch, they weren't allowed to kiss. So how do you keep it like, obviously we've all watched the Pride and Prejudice where he helps her up into the carriage and then he like flexes his hand and we all like, oh my gosh, like he just flexed his hand, but we're all like swooning, you know? So like, how do you do that in a book and keep people interested in the romance part of it without being bored of like, well, they're just not touching, this isn't fun anymore?
It takes such skill. I just love Regency for this, because it's not just the sexual tension, but it's the conversation and the wit, and it's very, very subtle. The British stiff upper lip is a real thing all through Regency, but it's really fun. It's just like, have you ever tried to write a scene where the characters were talking about something that had nothing to do with anything romantic, but you turned it into something really kind of steamy? That is kind of what Regency is. So to us, like placing a hand on a forearm is like, great. But to them, you know, it just depends on how you play it up, right? It's really, really special. And there's hidden moments. If everything's forbidden, then a quiet, dark corner where you're actually alone for 2 seconds is a huge, huge moment. It's like the hot tub scene, like in whatever, right?
Or like even just being in a room alone together, like a big library alone for 5 minutes would be like, whoa.
It's like huge. And so you have to write it as though you're in the time period, right? That's the trick. If you're writing it from your perspective today, it's not going to come off sounding exciting at all. But if you're that girl who's never been alone with a guy ever, and now this really handsome man like moves your hair out of your face, it's like the tingles down your skin. You know, it's great. If their gloves ever come off, huge. That's like later on in the book, right? Like, because skin on skin never happened, you know, their ankles didn't show. That was scandalous. Like, there's so many things you can do, starting with the catching of each other's eye across the room, noticing things. Like, it's really a turn on when a guy notices you. I mean, just the fact, you know, if he mentions, oh, you're wearing a different color today, or, you know, that's huge. Like, it's a lot of it's emotional. Part of the problem is they weren't allowed to talk about anything too deep either. So you're really dealing with subtle nuances and the assumption and what your reader's imagining, even though you're not saying it. So there's a lot of that going on.
You just have, that's why knowing the genre matters. Like, you have to know not only what they can do, what they can get away with, but you have to know that something is a big deal, right? So like if they're at a ball and this sort of like a Darcy character comes across to the girl and talks to her, and they exchange like 3 to 4 sentences and maybe one dance, everybody would be talking about it. You know, like he gave her his attention, and that alone is enough to signal interest, right? Because you didn't go up to somebody and hang out with them throughout the whole ball, and you didn't keep dancing with them over and over and over again. Like, if they go for a second dance, they're almost saying they're going to get engaged. You know, it's just, that's why it's all so important to know what is meaningful and what it is telling people that is going on. So like, one of my favorite Georgette Hare books for this is The Wicked Uncle. Yeah, so Sylvester or The Wicked Uncle. It's got 2 different things. And it's just the way that she throws them together in a meaningful way so they have more interaction. But all these little tiny details throughout the story let you know that the interest is growing and the sexual tension is growing and their attraction is amping up. And so you know that a kiss is going to happen at some point in the story. Although I will say it again that my favorite, The Grand Sophie, doesn't even have a kiss, and it's still like one of the most has the most sexual tension, I think, of almost any of her other books. So it's just this crazy thing that can happen, and you don't get that in contemporary.
It takes some real talent. It takes some really good writing, and I'm not saying I've mastered it, but it takes some really, if you can make an innocuous scene mean something, that's really cool. I think it takes, you know.
It is 100% about characterization.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have good characters. You have to have them jump off the page and let the reader know what they're thinking and feeling by tiny gives, you know, like tiny little indicators that the reader knows them so well that they know what the raise of an eyebrow means, you know.
And the Regency readers help you out because they're used to this, so they're looking for that. They're hungrily waiting for the next thing that is going to show that they like each other or that they don't like each other or whatever. So it's kind of fun, and you can sneak in kisses. You just have to know you're breaking the rule, and you have to explain it. And if they got caught, they'd be forced to get married. So if you know all these things, then you kind of, it amps up the tension, just that it's forbidden. That kind of stuff is cool. So yeah, that's a good questioning.
Awesome. Well, you have definitely enlightened us all, but what everybody wants to know is money. Can you make money in historicals? And not only Regency, but in historical subgenres outside of Regency? Or can you only make money, big money, writing Jane Austen-esque stories?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is yes, you absolutely can. The people that I know that are trying this out indie are keeping their ranks really low. They stick longer than my contemporaries stick. They top charts way longer than my other contemporaries. They're doing really, really well. There's a huge readership, and they're hungry for more. So it's breaking in, right? Finding the cover that's going to sell. There's a lot of books that aren't necessarily accurate that are selling really, really well. And it's nobody that I even know, right? So it's breaking in to find those readers and show them, what's possible. As far as other genres, Victorian's really selling good right now. It's similar to Regency. It's not, but people think it is. They clump them together. And World War II, but those, I try to do a little bit of research. I'm not an expert on market of historical books, but I do know that that it is a hot seller, and it has been for years. So I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Yeah, it's just from success stories of people that we know, and mine. The ones I have, my first books ever were with my publisher. And so that's a little bit of a different marketing plan, and a different price point and everything else. And those did really well. And I have 2 more coming out later with those. But the Regency House Party ones we put up, you're talking about basically 4 almost unknown Regency authors, and just put books out, did very little promo and some newsletter swaps with people that mostly write contemporary and some historical. And they did great for we did a month and a week of fast release launches every week. And they stayed low rank and sold well through the whole time, all 5 of them. So, and those are people that we were starting new with most of our platforms. So I think there's definitely a market for it, for sure. And those people who bought, we don't think necessarily were in our group that we'd been collecting either. I think those were just new readers. So that's my take on Regency, and I think Victorian as well.
Did you see a lot of crossover between contemporary to Regency? This was another question.
I would have if I had set up my original historical platform differently. My historical platform, my readers are really picky. And my original Jen readers love historical, and they pretty much love that. And there was very little crossover from them. But I've grown since. If I had marketed myself from the beginning as more of a romance author and less of a historical author, I think that I would have more crossover. I know, like Heather Moore, who, by the way, is also a really good historical writer, but she writes everything. She's written all kinds of historical, all kinds of contemporary. Her readers they switch over, they read everything she writes. And so I think if you market yourself as a romance author, like I know Michelle is doing, then I think you'll have a lot more crossover from the beginning. I have 2 separate lists. I have a contemporary list for my contempt name, and I have a historical list. And my historical list will buy up Westerns. They'll buy up European type stuff. They'll probably, hopefully, buy my time travel because it has Regency and contempt in it. It's just a different feel of a list. My Sophia list will buy pretty much all my historicals and all the contemporary. So it's if you're selling yourself as a romance author, I think there's a lot of crossover. That was a long answer to what could have been a short question.
So when I started out, since I started out with a contemporary list, but it was all romance, and I've been marketing myself from the beginning as writing across genres. I've been prepping people for all these other projects I'm going to do. And I actually, when I announced to my newsletter that I needed ARC readers for my Regency, I said just sign up for my historical newsletter and I'll send you the book. I had like 170 people from my contemporary list that I had no idea if they even liked historical say, yes, I want to read for you for, and I've had people say, I don't care what genre you write in as long as it's romance. Like that's what people care about is the romance, and they'll follow it across genres. But like Jen said, I mean, it's a little bit trickier going from historical to romance. Romance readers, I think, will read sci-fi. I think they'll read fantasy. I think they'll read paranormal. They're very diverse. As long as people are falling in love, they'll follow it.
Yeah. So I think it just depends how you market yourself. I love my historical readers and I love the historical side to me, and I don't regret anything about that. I think it's simple enough for me to have 2 lists, you know what I mean, and a different pen name. But I feel like because I'm passionate about some of the stuff I write for history, and I think the readers can tell I write romance in my history, but I'm also bringing to light heroes from the past. I'm saying things about the past that I don't want forgotten. Like I cry in those books. Like there's just a lot there. And I think that, and that's how I set it up. And I'm happy with that. But I feel like if you were wanting to do cross genre, you need to start kind of prepping your readers and finding, adding more to your readership that like both genres. And then the ones that like you just for historical, stick around for that. And the ones that like, you'll grow and define, like Michelle said, the very diverse readership that you're looking for. But
right. Awesome. Well, those were our questions because we had more other questions, but I think you covered them all in the talking. So I don't think we need to go over those at all. Do we have any questions on the feed? Yes.
Yeah, so we have just a couple. I think we answered a lot of them. Sally was asking about Regency resources, so Jen, you did that really well. And then Danielle is asking how well does the Victorian genre do? And you mentioned it. I think the Victorian genre is strong, not as strong as Regency, but it is doing really well. Better than I think Civil War, World War II, or Korean War, or all these other sort of historical landmark genres are doing. Victorian does better than all the rest besides Regency, wouldn't you say? And Western are right there with it.
I totally agree. I feel like part of the reason is they clump it with Regency. I think Regency is just kind of the sweet spot, honestly, if I were to guess. I haven't seen anything do quite what Regency does, and for as long as it has. Regency's been going forever.
The fun thing with Victorian is that you can kind of slide over into steampunk if you want to, which is always fun.
And people do, and that does really well. Yeah, when they do that, it's true.
There's just different things like you can do in Victorian. The Victorian era had like different kinds of dresses and different technology available, and like they could go, get on a steamship or get on a train or, things like that, where those kinds of things weren't possible in Regency. So it's just like, I think some people like to explore Victorian England because it is different, but it's still got that same feel of, really cool otherworldly things almost.
Yeah, it's great.
It's getting late, guys.
No, so is there any other questions? I know I'm like
that's it.
There's one that I don't know. Did you go over? Because Steve McGuire asked a question. Have you used a real historical figure as a character in your story? And if so, anything you need to be aware of?
Jen sure has, right?
Yeah, I do that all the time, and I've heard people say to warn you against it. I've heard that said, and I don't know. Don't make the person's family sad that you like slam their their ancestor, right? So be kind in your representation. But like people rip on Prinny all the time. I mean, that guy, nobody likes him, and he's in every Regency. There's some typical Regency figures that show up in all the books. There's ladies at Almack's that are in there, and there's Prinny and Beau Brummel and several others, and all the poets of the day, like Byron's in a lot of the books, Wordsworth. So, but I personally love to do this. I find a character in the past that I feel like needs to be honored, that I respect, and that I don't want to be forgotten. And this is where my passion comes out, and I will find ways to bring them into the story. I have a book coming out that my character runs away to America. She's running away from a horrible, horrible Big Tooth Nigel marriage. And but in America, I found out in Philadelphia, where they are, is the first African-American congregation run by African-Americans of freed slaves, forced slaves. And I found that out and thought, I have to include these people. So they became heroes in part of the climax of the book. They saved my heroine from the bad guy, and they were these really, really neat people in my story. I would encourage you to include real people in your books. I feel like you do. There are some things you should be careful about, and there's also the understanding that you represent people in the way that you would want to be represented, or the way that they would want to be represented. If they're a bad guy, don't make them. Probably don't make your bad guys the real people. I guess that's my make up your own villain and make your good guys real people.
And I would say one thing that a lot of people don't think about is how we view women and women's role in society is so different now versus then. And so many people just go in and they just write heroines acting and thinking like we would. And that's not realistic, because they wouldn't have. They didn't have the freedom of movement. They didn't have freedom of, owning things. Like they didn't even own their children. Like as far as they didn't have rights to their children. I mean, they couldn't go to the law. They couldn't go to any court case and get anything. I mean, like women had no power at this stage, and you cannot make a woman as liberated and as powerful as she is now back then. And so if you wanted to make a woman powerful, if you wanted to make her where she could be a mover and a shaker, you had to do it in a different way. Mm-hmm. So you have to understand how things worked back then, and you can't have just all these, like, I love strong female characters in historicals, but I hate it when they're just a modern person stuck in that time. It doesn't work. It's so much more fascinating and interesting to see when women were able to really affect change and to direct their lives through their own intelligence and talent that they were able to employ. And that's what makes it interesting. And there are actual historical figures that were the beginners of the women's rights movement during the Regency period. And those are some of the historical figures you will find that are real people that pop up in these genres, because, they were incredible at what they started back then. And people in the Regency period literally thought that women couldn't develop an understanding beyond that of like an 8-year-old child. They thought that was the most that women could rise to. And so you can hate it as much as you want to hate it, but you got to understand that that's the world you're working in. And so you have to figure out how your characters are going to rise above that and shine.
Yeah, there's so much going on. Well, yeah, this is a topic there's so much going on during Regency besides just the wealthy interactions with the ton. I mean, the women's suffrage movement started, and in fact, I have a book about that. Just if Covenant would publish my books a little faster, I could show you all these things. But what you said is absolutely true. And there are strong women in history. And those are the ones I particularly love to bring out, because you can see how they did it within the constraints of what they had, and their perspective and their point of view matters. It's really great. I love that about history. And we have a responsibility with historical romance to be accurate, and even as if you were trying to portray another race or a religion other than your own, you're portraying another time period that you can't possibly totally understand, and so respect that. try your best to be accurate and understand that, portraying them in the most accurate way possible does justice to what the lives that they lived. Anyway, so yeah. But I really love being here with you guys. I don't know. I feel like I've talked way too much, but I appreciate the time. And I'm open for questions. Separate from this, you guys can find me on Facebook or wherever. If you need help, I'm here. And we just touched the surface of what you can do to research. There's so many more available resources. So you can approach me later if you want. Or Michelle, she knows stuff.
Jen and I have just been geeking out for this whole podcast. And
that's the truth.
But Jen does write contemporary too, and so yeah. So there's a lot.
They always ask me, "Are you going to tell people your name?" I think most authors that we all know my pen name. I write under Sophia Summers, and I have Billionaire Cowboys. I've got a Bride series coming out, and I have what else am I doing? Oh, Taming Scrooge. I have a big Christmas one I'm trying to sell right now that's doing pretty well. So that I have a lot of fun with those, and it's been fun. I've tried to use this new pen name to understand the Writing Gals way to market, and it works. It's been very successful, and it's been fun. I launched my pen name in May of this year, and I have 13 titles out or something, and I make regularly about $5,000 a month just on those titles. So I say that because it's just what you guys teach and what you guys share. You're so open with your marketing and everything else that it's totally possible to increase your income and enjoy writing and enjoy it for love and for money. And that's, as a hybrid author, that's kind of what I feel like I'm doing. Though I love actually both. I love to write contemporary as well. But I feel like I'm just about to start a stronger indie path with my historical name. I'll probably always write for Covenant. I appreciate them a lot and what they're trying to do in the world, and I love the reach they give me as an author. They're a good publisher. But I'm also going to start indie publishing a significant amount of historical titles, and I feel like, especially in Regency and some French Revolution, because I dabble there too, I feel like there's an opportunity for wealth there that is untouched, really. Just like the billionaires, I feel like they're the historical billionaires. Anyway, so that's me. I appreciate being here very much. You guys have done a lot for the writing world in general. You're taking it by storm. Doing good.
Well, we're excited to have you here, even though me and Judy were mostly quiet the whole time. It was absorbing the knowledge that you guys so graciously imparted on us.
Yeah, maybe someday I will dare write a historical novel.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to, but I don't know. That's a lot of research. Time.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast by Brandon Sanderson, and you guys were talking about your careers or your schooling, what you chose. And he was like, if you're going to write, don't do a creative writing major. Take classes in everything. Take historical classes. Take classes in other languages. Just learn and absorb as much as you possibly can so that when you go to writing, it all comes out. And I bet your historical backgrounds have helped form your contemporary and how you form your books and what you put in there and things like that. So it's just made me realize I probably need to just study more on my own, just in general of everything. There's no stopping you from getting smarter than where you are now. So, and then, you can use that and shows up in your writing. So with that, go ahead, Michelle. You want to say something?
No, I was just going to say it's exactly the thing. Like whatever your people are, whatever your characters do, like think of all the things you can learn about that world or that, whatever their profession. And that's what I think is so interesting. I think writers must be the most educated people in the world because we know about so many different things because we have to write about it. I mean, I think that's incredible. We're awesome people.
Everyone,
once you know a solid Regency base, it's common knowledge to you as if it's another language and a culture that you live. And so once you put in the research, it's there. Though I'm 45, my brain, it's written on a paper for me, right? But everybody else can keep it in their head, and it's all, it's not as intimidating as it sounds, is basically what I'm saying.
I don't think it's your age. I think it's being a mom. And your brain has to be everywhere all the time. And sometimes I'm like, hurry up, just tell me what you need to tell me in a short period of time because I'm already thinking about something else while you're still trying to figure out what to tell me. So I think it's just a mom brain. Okay, well, we will end this tonight now. Thank you for sticking with us. And if you like what you see, please subscribe below. And next week, we will not be here. We're going to take the rest of the year off because it's Christmas and then it's New Year's. So I hope you don't miss us too much. But we'll join our Facebook group and you'll find out what we're going to talk about next year. Whenever that Thursday is. I don't know. Maybe it's the Thursday after New Year. I don't know.
We need to have like a writing goals for the year podcast, don't we?
Yeah. So if you want to be on our Facebook group and you want to start a chat where you say the podcast that you want to see, we'll start lining those things up. You know, please don't say anybody super famous because we probably won't be able to get them on. But
at least not yet. We'll have to get a little bit more, popular before we can bring
and if you want to meet us in person,
Nebraska
conference in March.
April. It's in April. It's April 11th through 13th or something. I know my daughter's birthday is right in the middle of it, so that's how I'm remembering. And you will be able
to hang out with us, see us in person. So make sure you sign up for that conference. Anyways, it's late and we should go to bed.
Stop talking.
Goodbye.
Thanks for having me.
People to subscribe.
Yes.
Subscribe.